Okay, let's jump right in. You might think for a proper deep dive, we need, loads of articles, tons of research, maybe conflicting sources. But what if I told you that sometimes the biggest insights, those real aha moments, well, they can come from something incredibly small. Today, we're doing something a bit different. Our entire analysis, our whole deep dive, it hinges on just one single headline. It's from the Washington Post, dated July 26, 2025, and it just says, Trump's Southeast Asian Ceasefire Diplomacy. That's it. 5 words.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating here is just how much is implied, how much context, how many different possibilities, and what really critical questions just pop up immediately from those few words. So our mission today really is to kind of perform an exercise in information extraction, to decode what's implied, the potential meaning hiding in the structure of the headline itself. Because even without the whole article, that headline, it's a pretty significant piece of news on its own. It forces you to think about a whole web of possibilities.
Absolutely. It's almost like a detective story with hardly any clues, but the story itself could be massive. So we're going to break down every single word. Think about the layers of meaning, the geopolitical ripples each part could suggest. It's about becoming truly well-informed, right? Not just by what's written plain as day, but by what's powerfully hinted at. Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. The very first word, trumps. Now, in a hypothetical July 2025 situation, that single possessive word, it really sets a particular stage. What jumps out at you? What are the immediate big implications when you see that name linked to international diplomacy?
Well, right away, it tells you this probably isn't business as usual. Trump's suggests something very personalized, or at least a major role accredited directly to him. The huge question it brings up for me is, what is his status in July 2025? Is he, a former president acting as a private citizen, using his personal clout, or maybe a special envoy for the current administration, or could he even be president again? Each of those scenarios is totally different and changes everything about the protocol, the legitimacy of it all, the very nature of this diplomacy. It definitely signals something unconventional, whatever his official title might be.
That's a really critical distinction, isn't it? It makes us think outside the box of normal diplomatic channels, which then naturally leads to the next part, Southeast Asian. So this isn't some global peace effort. It's not the Middle East, not Eastern Europe, which we often hear about. It's specifically Southeast Asia. What does that regional focus tell us? What kind of conflict or strategic interests might be involved?
It definitely narrows the possibilities quite dramatically. It forces us to think about the specific geopolitics of that region. Southeast Asia is incredibly complex.
Yeah.
You've got intricate relationships with major powers like the U.S. and China, ongoing maritime disputes, especially the South China Sea, plus various internal conflicts or issues across borders. The fact that the headline is so specific suggests that whatever conflict this is, it's serious. Serious enough to really shake up regional stability, maybe even pull in major powers, either directly or by proxy. It points to a flashpoint that somehow got bad enough to need a ceasefire.
And this is where I think it gets really compelling. Ceasefire diplomacy. That phrase itself is just loaded, absolutely packed. Ceasefire means there's active fighting, right? Maybe intense fighting, not just a disagreement, but actual armed conflict that needs to stop.
Exactly, an urgent stop.
And then diplomacy tells us the approach is negotiation, talks, strategy, not sending in troops. What's the hidden weight in putting those two together, especially with Trump's attached?
Well, ceasefire, like you said, screams urgency. It tells us the situation is probably quite dire. We're likely talking active hostilities, maybe significant casualties, or immediate threats that just demand a halt. It suggests a conflict that's maybe spiraled out of regional control or poses a real threat to wider stability. Then you add diplomacy, and especially with Trump involved, it hints at a very direct, possibly high-stakes political negotiation. It might even be bypassing the usual channels, the established multilateral groups like the UN or maybe ASEAN's typical processes.
Right.
It could suggest he brings some unique leverage to the table or maybe a very particular approach, perhaps even transactional to de-escalation that others couldn't pull off or maybe wouldn't even try. It really makes you ask, what exactly happened to trigger this level of direct, personalized intervention in a region known for its very complex multi-layered diplomacy?
It's just incredible how a few seemingly simple words can paint such a vivid picture, even if it's implied, of what the world might look like in 2025. Trump's Southeast Asian Ceasefire Diplomacy from the Washington Post. It sketches out this whole scenario. a major globally known figure deep in high-level talks, trying to stop an active war in a really sensitive part of the world. And the date gives us the time frame. The publication adds that layer of journalistic weight. It forces us to think about so much that isn't explicitly spelled out.
It really does. It pushes us to ask some pretty fundamental questions about power, about influence, about intervention in, international relations today. Is this some kind of new model for diplomacy? Does it show a shift maybe in how people see traditional statecraft versus, say, personal brands or influence? The headline doesn't give us the answers, of course,
No.
but it does a brilliant job of prompting us to engage in exactly this kind of informed speculation.
Yeah.
It invites us to really dig into the story behind the headline.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? We've basically just walked through how a tiny piece of information, just one headline, can be absolutely packed with meaning, how it can set off this cascade of really critical questions. We've seen how breaking down just 5 words can reveal layers upon layers of implied context. Everything from, the potential role of a historical figure to the specifics of regional conflicts and even the shifting sands of international engagement. This whole exercise is a good reminder, I think, that being truly informed isn't just about swallowing information whole. It's about actively taking it apart, dissecting it.
And that raises, I think, a really important question for all of us, doesn't it? In this world where we're just bombarded with information constantly, how often do we actually pause? How often do we stop and really unpack the implications of a headline before we just swipe or click to the next thing? What more could we learn? How much better informed could we be if we treated every single news item as its own potential deep dive? If it were considered not just what it says, but what it implies about the world around us, and critically, how that information is being framed and presented to us.
A lot to think about there.